My wife hit the jackpot, $9 million to be exact. Filed for divorce and kicked me out, but she overlooked one crucial detail. The prenuptial agreement her own parents had insisted I sign before we tied the knot. I'm a 35-year-old man from a humble background. My parents live in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, and I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house that always carried the comforting scent of freshly laundered clothes and home-cooked meals. After high school, I took on various odd jobs, bartending, assisting at my uncle's hardware store, and eventually managing a small sporting goods shop. It wasn't extravagant, but it was honest work. My wife, on the other hand, came from a world completely foreign to me. Her parents owned multiple luxury properties, drove high-end cars, and hosted lavish, ostentatious gatherings several times a year. Let's refer to my father-in-law as FIL and my mother-in-law as MIL. FIL was an imposing figure, both socially and physically, exuding a silent authority in any room. His casual remarks often carried an undertone of veiled threats or manipulation. MIL was equally adept at silent judgment. A mere raised eyebrow from her was enough to make anyone feel small. While they were never outwardly cruel to me, their disapproval was always lurking beneath the veneer of polite conversation. After my wife and I got engaged, I quickly realized how much her parents feared outsiders gaining access to their family wealth. To them, I was nothing more than an interloper. Despite my wife and I having dated for years, FIL made it abundantly clear that no wedding would happen unless I signed a prenuptial agreement. I lacked the financial means to challenge it legally, and my love for my wife blinded me to any potential consequences. I convinced myself that the prenup was merely a formality to placate her parents. After all, love was the only guarantee I needed, right? I vividly remember the day I signed that document. It was a warm afternoon at her parents' sprawling estate. MIL presented the contract, sliding a pen my way, while FIL nonchalantly offered me coffee, making the whole ordeal feel like a mere business transaction. My wife stood off to the side, silent. That hurt, but I shrugged it off, believing it wouldn't matter in the long run. The agreement stated that any gifts, inheritances, or trust funds belonging to her family would remain solely hers, while any significant asset acquired during the marriage, such as a house or lottery winnings, would be considered marital property. I found it peculiar, but brushed it aside. All I wanted was to marry her. 6 months later, we had a picture-perfect wedding by a serene lakeside. My parents were overwhelmed by the extravagance, but remained supportive. I recall the tension in my father's face when he greeted my in-laws. He had always told me to trust my instincts, but I believed love would overcome any doubts. For the first couple of years, our marriage was relatively stable. We lived in a condo her parents had helped us secure. I contributed monthly to the mortgage, though the down payment had come from FIL's supposed gift. In hindsight, it was never truly a gift, more like a tool for control. But at the time, I assumed that's just how affluent families operated. We had typical arguments over finances and frequent disputes about her parents meddling in our lives. They would show up unannounced, replace furniture, and sometimes completely redecorate our living space without warning. My wife dismissed my frustration, attributing it to their helpful nature. Then, everything changed. One day, my wife called me, breathless with excitement. She had won a $9 million lottery jackpot from a random ticket she purchased at a gas station. Initially, I was ecstatic, envisioning a future of financial freedom, travel, and adventure. But my excitement quickly faded. She became secretive, insisting we keep the winnings hidden, even from my parents. Paranoia set in as she spoke about consulting lawyers I had never heard of. When I asked to be involved in these discussions, she dismissed me, saying, "You'd feel out of place." That stung. But I had no idea the real betrayal was yet to come. One afternoon, I arrived home exhausted from work, only to find her and her aunt rifling through our belongings. She delivered the news casually. She was filing for divorce and expected me to pack my bags and vacate the condo, claiming it was solely in her name. I was dumbfounded. Sure, Her father had covered the initial down payment, but I had been contributing to the mortgage every month. To her, that no longer mattered. With her newfound fortune, I had suddenly become obsolete, devastated. I called my father, my voice shaking as I told him I had just been kicked out of my own home. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, but the biggest shock was yet to come. I soon discovered that FIL had deployed his personal attorney to ensure the lottery winnings remained isolated from me. They wanted me out of the picture. However, in their haste to push me aside, they had overlooked the very prenuptial agreement they forced upon me. Instead of protecting their daughter entirely, the prenup explicitly stated that any windfall acquired during the marriage, including lottery winnings, was considered joint property. Suddenly, if they proceeded with the divorce, they might not get to keep it all. Realizing this, I decided to proceed carefully. My father advised me to remain calm, hire an attorney outside of their social circle, and prepare for an ugly legal battle. I had no intention of rolling over. They had treated me like an expendable nuisance, but they had underestimated me. For the next few nights, I stayed at my parents' house, trying to process the whirlwind of events. My mother was furious, ranting about how my in-laws had been disrespectful from day one. My father, though equally enraged, remained pragmatic. He reached out to an old friend, a seasoned family law attorney, and scheduled an appointment for me. Sitting in that attorney's office, I was overwhelmed with a mix of anger and relief. After reviewing the prenup, my lawyer chuckled. They screwed themselves, he said. The language is clear. Lottery winnings are marital assets. Unless a judge pulls some extreme legal maneuver, you're entitled to a significant portion. Hearing that was like being thrown a lifeline. I had been terrified that the prenup would lock me out, but their obsession with protecting inherited wealth had blinded them to an unexpected scenario. My attorney warned that this wouldn't be an easy fight. My in-laws were powerful, wealthy, and well-connected. They would undoubtedly unleash an army of lawyers to intimidate me. But we had a solid case, especially since I had contributed financially to the marriage and had been abruptly removed from our shared home. Sure enough, within days, FIL left me a menacing voicemail, warning me to back off and claiming I wasn't entitled to anything. MIL showed up at my parents' house, feigning concern and offering a pathetic sum to make me vanish quietly. I refused, stating we'd settle this in court. She scoffed, clearly unaccustomed to anyone defying her. As negotiations reached a standstill, my lawyer filed motions to prevent the lottery funds from being concealed or transferred. That infuriated my in-laws, who began spreading rumors that I was a gold digger preying on their innocent daughter. The tension was suffocating, but I stood firm. Nothing could have prepared me for the courtroom showdown, but at least I knew one thing. The law, ironically, was on my side, thanks to the very contract they had forced upon me. They regarded me with the same air of superiority. But their confident expressions wavered when my attorney calmly presented the prenuptial agreement, specifically highlighting the clause regarding lottery earnings. The judge listened attentively, showing little interest in their feeble attempts to discredit it. Without hesitation, she ordered that all significant assets remain frozen until the main hearing. That afternoon, my mother-in-law confronted me outside the courthouse, insisting we have a mature discussion. She attempted to offer me a lump sum, an even smaller amount than before, calling it a generous gesture considering my background. I rejected it outright, stating that we would let the court determine the outcome. Her composure cracked, and she accused me of tearing the family apart, as though I had been the one who blindsided her daughter with divorce. The hypocrisy made my blood simmer, but I maintained my composure. My lawyer had warned me against engaging in heated disputes that could later be manipulated against me. Behind the scenes, I feared my in-laws might attempt to funnel the lottery winnings into undisclosed accounts. Anticipating this, my attorney swiftly requested court orders preventing any substantial financial transfers. We also arranged for a forensic accountant in case we suspected them of concealing assets. My father-in-law's temper flared. He left me a voicemail branding me a parasite, accusing me of draining the joy from his daughter's life. The irony was striking, considering they had cast me aside the moment they struck gold. As the hearing approached, I meticulously prepared with my lawyer. We rehearsed my statements to ensure I came across as composed and factual. I gathered evidence, copies of the prenup, receipts proving my contributions to the mortgage, and even messages from my wife acknowledging our shared expenses. My attorney advised me to keep my responses succinct and let the documentation do the talking. If they resorted to emotional manipulation, we would counter with undeniable proof. On the morning of the hearing, my heart pounded as I stood before the courthouse. My parents accompanied me for moral support, though they remained outside the courtroom. Upon entering, I spotted my wife seated beside her father, both donning cold, impassive expressions. Her mother lingered at the back, arms crossed. Their high-priced attorneys, clad in pristine suits, exuded confidence, perhaps assuming their financial clout could overshadow the facts. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, wasted no time. She invited each side to present their arguments. My wife's lead attorney attempted to portray me as a mere occupant in the marriage, contributing little beyond sharing the same living space. They insisted the lottery ticket was solely my wife's purchase, made with her own funds. However, my lawyer methodically dismantled their claims, pointing out that the prenuptial agreement explicitly classified such windfalls as marital property. We also presented bank statements proving she had used our joint account to buy the ticket. As soon as this evidence surfaced, a visible wave of tension rippled through my father-in-law's camp. The judge directly asked if they had any documentation contradicting this fact. They fumbled, weakly asserting that the card had been used by mistake or that the funds belonged to her father. However, the account statements clearly listed both our names, not hers alone. The judge took note, her scrutinizing gaze settling on them expectantly. At last, my wife spoke. She claimed she had never intended to hurt me and that her parents had pressured her into filing for divorce after the jackpot win to safeguard family assets. She faltered, admitting she felt trapped, but attempted to justify her actions by insisting that if word got out about the money, everyone would come after us. My lawyer promptly asked if she had ever consulted me before making these decisions. She hesitated before admitting she had not. The judge's disapproval became unmistakable. By midday, it was evident that the prenuptial agreement had become a double-edged sword for them. The very document they had used to shield their wealth now jeopardized their grip on the lottery fortune. The judge scheduled a follow-up hearing for the final ruling, indicating she was inclined to classify the lottery winnings as a significant marital asset subject to equitable distribution. Outside, my father-in-law strode past me, muttering, "This isn't over," but his confidence had visibly cracked. In the weeks leading up to the final decision, their desperation intensified. My father-in-law's legal team scrambled, filing motions to reinterpret the prenup's wording, arguing that lottery proceeds had never been meant for inclusion. The judge swiftly dismissed these attempts, citing the agreement's unambiguous language. My mother-in-law confronted me once more, warning that I would regret it if I continued dismantling their family. I bluntly reminded her that they had initiated this war by throwing me out and blindsiding me with divorce. My wife also reached out, leaving emotional voicemails, claiming she didn't want things to end on such a bitter note. She suggested a private settlement to preserve some semblance of a relationship. If they had treated me fairly from the outset, I might have considered it. But after the deception, intimidation, and forced eviction, my trust was shattered. My lawyer advised against engaging in any behind-the-scenes negotiations. We had a strong legal stance with no reason to accept crumbs. Finally, the day of the ruling arrived. The courtroom was filled with attorneys, family members, and a few friends who had come to support me. My father-in-law's lead lawyer made one last attempt, painting me as a cunning opportunist who had only discovered the prenup's loophole after benefiting from the family's generosity. My lawyer countered with cold, hard facts. First, they had coerced me into signing the prenup. Second, the agreement explicitly categorized lottery winnings as marital property. Third, I had contributed to our home, making it a joint asset. Moreover, their hasty divorce filing immediately after the jackpot, when was undeniable proof of their scheme to exclude me from the fortune. The judge, after patiently hearing both sides, delivered her verdict. She ruled that the lottery winnings were undeniably a marital asset by the prenup's explicit language. She rebuked my in-laws for attempting to manipulate the very agreement they had designed. Furthermore, she deemed my forced eviction from our home as unjustified and ordered reimbursement for my share of the mortgage and other financial contributions. In summary, I was awarded a substantial portion of the lottery windfall, along with compensation for my investments in our home. The finalization date was set a few weeks later, allowing time for processing the legal formalities. My father-in-law's face was stormy with rage. My mother-in-law hissed in disbelief, and my wife stood in silence, tears in her eyes, though whether from regret or fury over the financial loss, I couldn't tell. In the aftermath, their legal team attempted to negotiate a slight reduction in my awarded amount, likely hoping I would accept a smaller sum to avoid further conflict. My lawyer advised against it. We had won, and there was no reason to settle for less. The only concession I made was relinquishing any interest in the condo. I had no desire to set foot in that place again. Ultimately, they cut me a check for a considerable amount. Was it half the jackpot? Not quite, but it was more than enough to allow me to rebuild my life comfortably. This ordeal had taught me one crucial lesson. My in-laws, blinded by arrogance, had believed their wealth made them untouchable. They never expected me to fight back effectively. Yet, the prenuptial agreement they once weaponized against me had, in a twist of poetic justice, ensured my rightful share. My wife, as far as I know, remains under her parents' influence, her reputation tarnished within their social circles due to the scandal. Mutual acquaintances have mentioned she struggles with guilt, but I doubt she will ever fully acknowledge her family's role in orchestrating this debacle. With part of my settlement, I helped my parents upgrade their home as a gesture of gratitude for their unwavering support. Another portion I invested wisely, though this experience had left scars, altering my perception of trust, marriage, and wealth. I took solace in knowing I had stood my ground. They thought they could crush me. Instead, they handed me the very weapon that secured my victory. They initiated this battle. I finished it. And with that, this chapter of my life came to a close.